I want to tell you about the day I opened a letter that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary as any other. The coffee was hot, the sun was coming through the kitchen window, and I was feeling, for the first time in a long time, genuinely hopeful. I had just retired after 38 years of teaching 8th grade history in Clover Falls, Kentucky. I had a modest savings account, a plan, and what I believed was an unbreakable bond with my son. Then the envelope arrived. It was from First Commonwealth Bank. I almost set it aside. I figured it was the usual statement, maybe a rate notice, but something made me open it right then, standing at the kitchen counter in my slippers. It was a mortgage document. My name was nowhere on it. Eric Allen Miller was listed as the sole owner of 412 Sycamore Lane, the house I had bought with my own money, the house I was renovating for us, the house I had dreamed would be where and watch my grandson grow up. My son had taken my home. And not just taken it, he'd borrowed against it, $62,000 in a lien, secured against a property he had no right to mortgage, with a signature I did not recognize as my own. I stood there for a long time. The coffee went cold, the sun moved across the floor, and I felt something I hadn't felt since my wife Dorothy passed, completely, utterly alone. But that was just the beginning of my plan. Let me take you back a few months, because none of this happened overnight. When Dorothy died 4 years ago, she left behind more than grief. She left behind a clarity I hadn't expected. A quiet voice that said, "Harold, don't waste what's left. Build something that lasts." So I did. I retired in June of last year. 38 years in the classroom. 38 years of teaching young people that history is not just dates and battles. It's about choices. Every person at every crossroads makes a choice, and those choices define who they are. I believed that with my whole heart. I still do. After retirement, I decided to take the money Dorothy and I had saved, about $140,000 between my pension payout and her life insurance, and buy a house, big enough for two. My grandson, Tyler, was 16. His mother, Eric's ex-wife, had moved to Portland, and Tyler had chosen to stay near his dad. I thought, if I had a real home, a place with a proper yard, a room for Tyler, space for dinners on Sunday, maybe I could hold what was left of this family. I found 412 Sycamore Lane in March. A solid 2-story home on a quiet street, priced right at $118,000. Needed work, new floors, a repainted exterior, updated bathroom tile, but the bones were good. Dorothy would have loved it. I paid cash, every penny. Eric was the one who suggested handling the renovation himself. He had a small contracting business at the time, Miller Home Solutions, and he was struggling a bit. I knew that. I thought giving him the renovation job would help him out, keep money in the family. I trusted him completely. "Dad, I'll take care of everything," he told me over dinner one evening. He had that smile, the easy, confident one he's had since he was a boy. "You just relax. You've earned it." I handed him a signed authorization to deal with the city permits on my behalf. I didn't read every line. Why would I? He was my son. That was my first mistake, and I've thought about it every day since. The renovation started in April. Eric gave me weekly updates, sometimes in person, sometimes by phone, progress photos, small delays, supply chain issues, he said, normal stuff. I stayed with my old friend Gerald Whitmore across town while the work was being done, and I didn't push too hard. I trusted the process. I trusted my son. By the time the bank letter arrived in late July, 3 months had passed. 3 months in which, I would later learn, Eric had forged a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of the property into his name, then used that deed to secure a $62,000 home equity line of credit through a lender he'd worked with before. He had used the authorization letter, the permit letter, as cover. He told the notary it was a broader power of attorney. He found a notary who didn't ask enough questions. The money went into Miller Home Solutions, and not a single nail had been put in the walls of my house. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. I sat at Gerald's kitchen table that evening and spread the documents out in front of me. Gerald is a retired postal worker, not a lawyer, not a financial expert, but he's the kind of man who reads everything twice and asks good questions. "Harold," he said slowly, tracing his finger across the deed, "this is your signature?" "No," I said, "it is not." He looked at me for a long moment. "Then someone committed fraud," he said quietly. "Against you." I nodded, because I already knew. I just needed to hear it out loud. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in Gerald's guest room and stared at the ceiling and tried to find the version of events where this was a mistake, where Eric had somehow gotten confused, where there was a clerical error, where my son had not deliberately stolen from me. I couldn't find it. By morning, I had made a decision. I was 65 years old, not dead. I had spent 4 decades teaching young people that injustice must be named, challenged, and corrected, that silence in the face of wrong is its own kind of wrong. I was not going to be silent. I drove to Eric's house on a Wednesday morning, unannounced. He lived about 12 miles outside of Clover Falls, in a newer subdivision, the kind with vinyl siding and 2-car garages and mailboxes that all look the same. I'd bought him that house too, in a manner of speaking. I'd co-signed on his mortgage 6 years ago when he and his wife were still together, back when I thought the family was holding together. He answered the door in a t-shirt and jeans. He looked surprised to see me, but not guilty. Not yet. "Dad, hey, I was going to call you this week about the—" "Eric," I said, "I received a letter from the bank." Something shifted in his face, a tightening around the eyes. He stepped back and let me in without another word. We sat in his living room. I put the documents on the coffee table between us. He stared at them for a moment, and then he looked up at me with an expression I will never forget for the rest of my life. Not shame, not remorse, but something closer to calculation. "Dad, I can explain." "Then explain," I said. And he did, in his way. The business had hit a wall, he said. A big commercial contract had fallen through in February. He owed money to suppliers, to a subcontractor, to the bank. He needed a bridge loan. His credit was too damaged to get one on his own. He had intended to pay it back before I even moved in. I'd never have known, he said. He was going to refinance once the business stabilized. He had a plan. He said all of this calmly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, like he was explaining a business strategy to a client. I listened to every word. Then I said, "You forged my signature, Eric." He paused. "Dad, I had your authorization. A permit letter, not a deed transfer. You know the difference." He looked away, out the window, at the floor. "I needed help," he said, quietly. "You would have said no." "You're right," I said. "I would have said no because it was wrong." There was a long silence between us. In 38 years of teaching teenagers, I had learned the art of letting silence do the work. I let it sit. Finally, he said something that broke something inside me. Tyler knew it might happen. I didn't go into detail, but he knew things were being arranged. Tyler, my grandson, 16 years old, sitting in my kitchen over Easter dinner, talking about colleges, asking me what I thought of his history essay on the civil rights movement, looking me in the eye, knowing. I stood up. "I'm giving you an opportunity," I said, and my voice was steady, steadier than I felt. "I'm giving you an opportunity. You can contact the bank, begin reversing this, and we can discuss repayment. Or I will pursue this through every legal channel available to me. This is not a threat. It is simply what will happen." Eric looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I thought I saw something real flicker there, something like the boy he used to be. But then the calculation came back. "Dad, you don't want to go to court. This is family. Think about what you're doing. I picked up my documents and walked to the door. Think about what you did. And I left. If you've ever been made to feel like the problem for simply demanding what's right, you know exactly how I felt driving home that day. Sick, angry, but also, somewhere underneath it all, absolutely certain. I was not going to let this stand. I had taught Maria Delgado in 1998. She was one of those students who doesn't just remember lessons, she becomes them. Argues with you, challenges you, pushes you until you've got nothing left but the truth. I loved teaching kids like that. She was now a practicing attorney in Louisville, specializing in real estate and elder fraud. I'd seen her mentioned in the local paper about 2 years ago, something about a community legal clinic she'd organized. I still had the clipping in my desk drawer. I called her the next morning. She was quiet for a long time after I finished explaining. "Mr. Miller," she said. She still called me that 25 years later. "What you're describing is deed fraud. It's a serious felony in Kentucky. Do you have the bank documents?" "I have everything," I said. "Then I want you to come in tomorrow. Don't speak to Eric again until we've talked. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone into that property." I hadn't heard anyone speak with that kind of authority since Dorothy. It was steadying. Over the next 3 weeks, Maria moved carefully and methodically. She obtained the original deed records from the county clerk's office. She located the notary who had certified the transfer, a man named Dale Pruitt, who worked out of a small office over in Henderson County. When Maria contacted him with the documents, Dale went pale, she told me later. He claimed Eric had presented the authorization letter as a full power of attorney. He'd been deceived too in his own way, though not entirely off the hook. The forged signature was sent to a handwriting analyst. The report came back within 2 weeks. The signature bore superficial similarities to mine, but showed clear signs of being traced or copied. Inconsistent pen pressure, hesitation marks. Then Maria found something else. She was reviewing Eric's business records, which had become part of the civil discovery process, when she noticed payments to 2 other names, an elderly couple in Owensboro, a 71-year-old widower in Bowling Green. All 3 had hired Miller Home Solutions for renovation work. All 3 had signed over some form of property authorization. All 3 had liens on their properties they hadn't known about. Eric had done this before. He hadn't learned it with me. He had practiced it. I sat in Maria's office when she told me, and I felt the weight of it settle on me. This was not a desperate son making a terrible one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a method. Other old people, people like me, people who trusted, had been quietly robbed. "Harold," she slipped into my first name when things got serious. "The other victims need to know. If they come forward, it strengthens the criminal case significantly. Then we tell them." This required care. These were real people with real lives, and some of them might not even know what had happened to them yet. Maria reached out to each one through formal legal channels, gently explaining what had been discovered. It took about 6 weeks. One couple declined to participate, too frightened, too exhausted. But the Bowling Green widower, a man named Raymond Holt, agreed immediately. "I knew something was wrong," Raymond told Maria over the phone. "I just didn't know where to start." None of us had known where to start. That was the whole design. I also made the difficult decision to speak at the Clover Falls Senior Community Meeting in September, not to humiliate Eric publicly, that wasn't the point, but to warn others, to put a name to what had happened in general terms, and to remind people to have any property authorization reviewed by an independent attorney before signing. I did not name Eric directly in that room, but I told my story. And an older woman in the 3rd row reached over and took my hand. She said, "Same thing happened to my sister in Elizabethtown." The room was very quiet. The criminal complaint was filed in October. The Kentucky Attorney General's office took on the case, combining the complaints from me, Raymond Holt, and the county records office, which had flagged 2 additional suspicious deed transfers in Eric's name over the previous 18 months. I want to be honest with you. Legal processes are slow. They are supposed to be. The system is designed, imperfectly but intentionally, to require evidence, review, and time. Anyone who tells you justice comes quickly in a courtroom has never been through one. The preliminary hearings stretched from October into December. Eric retained a defense attorney, a sharp one from Louisville, and argued that the authorization letter constituted implied consent, that the notary had confirmed everything, that this was a civil misunderstanding between family members. It was a reasonable legal strategy, I'll give him that. But the handwriting analysis held. The records of the 3 separate transactions held. The testimony of Raymond Holt, a quiet, dignified man of 71 who looked the jury in the eye and described losing his wife's home to a contractor he'd trusted, that held most of all. I testified on a Thursday in February. Maria prepared me carefully. She told me, "Be honest, be calm, and do not try to make Eric look like a monster. Let the facts speak." I sat in the witness chair and told the truth. From the beginning, the house I bought for my grandson, the renovation contract, the authorization letter, the bank statement, the moment of understanding. I described the meeting at Eric's house. I described what he had said. When the defense attorney asked if I had ever verbally authorized my son to transfer the property, I looked at him calmly and said, "No, I did not, and I would not have, because it was wrong." Eric sat at the defense table throughout. I looked at him once, just once, midway through my testimony. He was staring at the table in front of him. I don't know what he was feeling. I stopped trying to read him a long time ago. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On a cold Friday afternoon in late February, the verdict came back. Guilty on 2 counts of deed fraud, 1 count of financial exploitation of an adult, and 1 count of forgery. Raymond Holt's case added a 2nd count of financial exploitation. Eric was sentenced to 4 years, with the possibility of parole after 2, and ordered to make full restitution to all victims, including the couple who declined to testify. The house on Sycamore Lane was returned to me by civil court order in March. The lien was voided as the product of fraud. The $62,000 Eric had drawn against it became a debt he would carry for years. I stood in front of that house on the day the paperwork was finalized. The yard was overgrown. The paint was peeling in places. The renovation work, of course, had never been done. None of that mattered. I put my hand on the front door. This is mine, I thought. It was always mine. If you've ever stood on the other side of a long, exhausting fight and finally felt the ground settle under your feet, you know what I felt in that moment. Not triumph, not revenge, something quieter and deeper. Relief, and something very close to peace. The house took 4 months to renovate properly this time. I hired a local contractor named Bev Kowalski, a woman in her 50s who ran her business out of a truck she'd driven for 20 years and had a reputation in Clover Falls for showing up on time and doing exactly what she said she'd do. Bev and her crew replaced the bathroom tiles, refinished the floors, painted the exterior a soft gray blue that Dorothy, I think, would have chosen herself. Gerald came over on weekends and helped where he could. He was slow on his knees but fast with an opinion, and I valued both. I settled into a routine: morning coffee, a walk along Sycamore Lane, dinner most evenings at Gerald's or with Maria and her family when she was in town. I started volunteering 2 mornings a week at the public library, tutoring adults who were working toward their GED. Old habits. I thought often about Eric during those months, not with rage. The rage had burned itself out somewhere around the 2nd week of trial preparation. What I felt was something more complicated. Grief, maybe. The kind you feel for a version of someone that turns out not to have been real, or at least not to have lasted. I did not visit him in prison. I wasn't ready for that, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I didn't close the door in my mind either. That felt important, to leave it a crack open. Not for his sake, perhaps, for mine. Tyler was a different matter. He was 17 by the time the trial ended, living with a school friend's family in town, his situation complicated by his father's legal circumstances and his mother still being in Portland. I saw him once in the courthouse parking lot after a hearing. He was waiting by a car with his hood up, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. He was a boy trying to figure out what to carry and what to put down. I almost walked past. Part of me wanted to. But I was a teacher, and before that, I was his grandfather. I walked over and stood next to him. Didn't say anything for a moment. We both looked at the empty parking spaces. "I didn't know all of it," he said quietly. "I knew things were messed up with Dad's business. I knew he was doing something with the house, but I didn't know it was—" He stopped. "I should have told you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He nodded, swallowed. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." I had been preparing myself for a lot of possible conversations, but something about the way he said it, not with performance, not with an excuse immediately following, something about the plain simplicity of it reached right past every wall I'd built. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Come see the house when it's finished. I'll need someone to help me plant the garden in the spring." He looked at me for a moment, and his eyes went bright. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, I'd like that." Tyler moved into the upstairs bedroom of 412 Sycamore Lane in April. He was finishing his senior year. He made his own meals most mornings, did his homework at the kitchen table, and carried his plate to the sink without being asked. He started talking about studying criminal justice in college. He said it like he was slightly embarrassed about it, looking sideways at me to see how I'd react. I told him it sounded right. We planted the garden together on a Saturday in mid-April. Tomatoes, peppers, a row of marigolds along the fence that Dorothy had always kept because she said they kept the rabbits away. Whether they do or not, I don't know. I think she just liked the color. Tyler is careful with me now in a way I understand. He's carrying guilt, and guilt makes people quiet. I don't push. I know from 38 years of watching teenagers that some things need time more than they need words. But some evenings, he'll knock on my door after dinner and ask if I want to watch something on TV, and we'll sit on the couch with the lamp on and not say much, and that is enough. That is more than enough. I heard from Maria in the fall that the notary, Dale Pruitt, had surrendered his commission and was cooperating with investigators reviewing other transactions he'd certified over the past several years. The Attorney General's office was expanding the investigation. I didn't need to be involved further. I had done what I set out to do. Not revenge. I want to be clear about that distinction because it matters to me. Revenge is about making someone feel what you felt. What I pursued was something else: accountability, the correction of a wrong, the protection of people who might come after me if I did nothing. I have thought many times about the moment I stood in the kitchen with that bank letter, about the temptation, and it was real, to simply call Eric and ask him to fix it quietly, to keep it in the family, to protect the idea of the family, even at the cost of the truth. I chose differently, and it cost me something. It always does. You don't take your son to court without losing part of what you hoped your life would be. There is no version of this story where everyone comes out whole. But Dorothy used to say, a wound you ignore doesn't heal, it just spreads. She was right about most things. The house is good now. The floors gleam when the morning light comes through. Tyler's shoes are by the front door. There are tomatoes on the vine. And on Sunday mornings, Maria sometimes brings her family over, and we sit on the back porch with coffee and talk about nothing important, which turns out to be the most important thing of all. I have days that are hard. I expect I always will. But I wake up in my own house. I eat at my own table. I look at the marigolds Dorothy would have planted, and I feel, beneath the loss and the complicated grief, something I did not expect to feel again at 65. Gratitude. Real family is the people who actually want you there. I found that out the hard way, but I found it. What would you have done?